Oh, that's
Okay. Good morning. For those who weren't here yesterday or somehow don't use YouTube, my name is John Judge, and this is a Coalition on Political Assassination regional meeting here in Los Angeles this weekend. We had a great crowd last night and some excellent speakers. We've got more today, and I was telling Bill Turner at breakfast that I'm finally getting old enough that I'm forgetting more than I wanted to know in the first place. So there are some blessings to age. But I also said that Lisa Pease, who's our next speaker, who is the co-author of the book The Assassinations and one of the founding members of Citizens for the Truth about the Kennedy assassinations, and also editor at Probe magazine for many years, and an indefatigable researcher.
fatigable, very fatigable.
She says fatigable, but she goes longer than most bunnies. But I told her she's giving a new meaning to the phrase that Sirhan draws a blank on the Robert Kennedy assassination, and she'll explain that further. But you know, I think we're in a unique area here because we've got one finally that's easier to prove the forensics, and also harder for the press to ignore. So I think you know, the momentum that Paul Schrade and the others are trying to get going, we need to assist them with, and really push this with you know, with Congress and with the press and all the different outlets to really take this seriously and look into it. And we're gonna have a special guest who's here already, Darwin Horn, who was 30 years in the Secret Service and wrote an autobiography. And I just found out about his book and him on the way to preparing for this meeting. But I asked him to come, and he kindly came by today to talk to us. And then we have Bill Turner here today, and also we have Shanna Sullivan's Film and Summer Reese to talk to us. So it's a full day, and then we'll have 2 more meals and some movies tonight. We got kicked out of the building last night, for those of you that didn't fade. So we were got about a half an hour left on RFK. Mark Zabel has to show today and talk to us about that too, but we'll fit it all in. And we're still working hard to overcome our live streaming problems that we were having before. But I was reminding Lisa of the Midwest Symposium some years ago in Chicago. I attended a ballistics panel on the John F. Kennedy assassination, and half of the ballistic experts said that no shots came from the front, and the other half of the ballistic experts said no shots came from the back. So then I got up and I said I was glad to hear that Kennedy wasn't hit. But I said, don't we yet know where the shots came from? They came from the Pentagon. So we got work to do, but I think, you know, there's serious work that's been done, and we've laid a foundation here, and so you're going to get more good information today. And Lisa's got a slideshow to do for you, and then we'll get on to the other speakers. But thanks to all of you for coming to COPA.
Are you okay? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here today. I owe everything I know to everyone who's come before me. I mean, the work of Joling, now Von Prague, certainly Bill Turner. There's so many people. Ted Chirac, of course. You know, your film was such an eye-opener for me the first time I saw it, and Paul Schrade's been a font of information. I mean, you know, I don't want to. Most of this is not original research, but there are a few things that I think no one has seen before that may be original research. We'll find out. Okay, now let's get started. So I want to talk about what we know, what we think we know. Oh, I'm sorry, I went right past it. I think we've had some assumptions in this case, things that we just have taken for granted are true that I'm going to call into question today, because it's very important if we base assumptions are based on actual facts and not, you know, not maybe false evidence. So I want to look at that today. And of course, then I've got some just weird things that are going to need some follow-up that we'll talk about at the end. And I will do some speculation. I'm not above that. But I like to very much separate what is fact, what we really know and that is provable fact, versus what I might think happened, which is a totally separate thing. And that will be the very end, you know, if people always ask me, what do you think happened? So I'll give you a little bit of that, but that's not proven, and I'll be the first to admit it. All right, let's go. This is one of my favorite quotes from George Orwell. Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 = 4. If that is granted, all else follows. And I think anybody who's been in this case for a long time knows exactly what that means, you know, because a lot of us don't feel free to say, you know, there was a conspiracy. We have to say, oh, there was a cover-up, or, you know, oh, you know, there's some questions to be raised. Well, you know, I feel like a free person today, and I'm going to call it as I see it. So we'll go from there. On the agenda, what we know. There are four bullet holes too many, and I'll show you exactly what they are, where they are, and how the LAPD asked the FBI to deny it, and the FBI's non-denial response, which was very interesting. We'll talk about what we think we know but don't. There's some very specific documents I'm going to show you regarding the bullets, and we'll talk about the number of gunmen. And then, like I said, some miscellaneous strangeness, just stuff that I'm putting out there in the hopes that other people will help follow up on. I can't research the whole case myself. None of us can. Some people have expertise in different areas that maybe can follow up on some of this. And lastly, what I think connects some of the various players in the case. All right, so what we know. Proof of conspiracy, proof of 12 shots, no expertise required. Right? You don't have to be a technical expert or, you know, ballistics expert. This part's pretty clear, I think. We have the LAPD scenario for the first 8 bullets. All right, I've copied out, you know, the famous page where they summarize all their little, this bullet went in and out of this guy's pants leg and into this guy's butt, and this one bounced through the ceiling and hit this woman in the forehead. I think it's a pretty ridiculous scenario on the face of it, but let's assume it's true. Let's assume everything the LAPD has told us so far is exactly true. They just haven't told us everything. All right, but assuming their scenario is true, that's 8 bullets and 12 points of entry. So, you know, 12 holes, 8 bullets. All right, so let's go on from there. All right. These are holes in the pantry. You know, when I was researching this case for years, I always heard about the center divider, and then one day I saw a picture of the left-hand frame, and I'm like, what? There's more holes in the center divider? They're on the left frame too? So we'll look at those actual pictures here. E1, one of the FBI photos taken, shows, and that is clearly the left-hand frame. You'll be able to see from the next slide that's not the center divider. And if you look at the top, it's obvious that that's the left part of the door. Also, the bullets are almost horizontal. All right, so on the next slide, you'll see, and of course, if those are 2 bullet holes, they were circled and labeled and photographed and unequivocally recorded in the FBI record as bullet holes. Not as suspected bullet holes, not as maybe bullet holes or probable, but simply as bullet holes. All right, now here, 2 vertical bullets, Thomas Noguchi there pointing, and that is the center door frame, and you can see that. One door is closed, one door is open. So now we have, you know, 8 bullets from the LAPD, 2 in the left-hand frame, that makes 10, 2 here in the center frame, that's 12 bullets. All right, if we look here and actually read the detail of what the FBI recorded when they were writing up these photos, all right, they say there was also a portion of the panel missing in that first photo. I'm going to go back to that for a second so you can see it. I believe they're talking about, I'll just point to it here. I don't know if they're talking about this or this, but they did reference that photo in particular. And they said the portion of the panel missing also reportedly contained a bullet. And as we all know, if there are 8 bullets already and any other bullet is found, there absolutely was well, I'd say there absolutely were 2 shooters. I think it's really easy to say if there were 2 shooters, you know, there was a very probable conspiracy. So, all right, E2 shows a close-up view of 2 bullet holes. E3 shows a close-up view of 2 bullet holes. Again, not probable, not possible, bullet holes. All right, so again, 7 bullets were actually recovered from people, 1 each from the 5 victims besides Kennedy, 2 from Kennedy himself, and then 1 officially lost in the ceiling space to account for the odd number of bullet holes. All right, you can't have a bullet go in and come out and not leave a hole. So if there are 3 holes, 1 had to be lost in the ceiling. So any other bullet hole, any single bullet hole, you know, if they were wrong about 3 of those 4 bullet holes, still, if there was 1, you know, we have an extra shooter. Okay, now, I've been thinking about this for a while. It's like, well, we have bullet holes. Where are the bullets? I mean, obviously a bullet doesn't go into a piece of wood and then come back out and turn around and go into a victim. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? If it goes into the wood, it stays there. Where did the bullets go? Well, we've seen a lot of the evidence of the LAPD's cover-up of other evidence all over this case. If there were bullets in those holes, do you think they would have told us? If they dug them out, do you think they would have recorded that in the evidence? And in fact, there were 2 bullets found in Sirhan's car that had wood in the grooves. Right? Is it possible that somebody, pulled the bullets out and went to plant them on Sirhan, assuming they came from his gun, and then found out they didn't match? Is it possible? I don't know. Because the LAPD burned the door frames, we have no way of going back and, reinvestigating what was in those holes or, any patterns that we might have found. But really, does anybody think for a second that the door frames would have been removed if they didn't show something significant, and they were destroyed because they showed something we might have needed to know? If they could prove there were no bullets, don't you think they would have preserved the door frames? They were very eager to show that Sirhan acted alone. If they could wipe this piece of evidence from the record, I'm sure they would have done it. So to me, this is proof, all right, that there were bullet holes, and the LAPD, didn't want us to know that. And here's the proof that the LAPD was very clear on the problem. They wrote the FBI, and they said, these photographs purportedly taken by Special Agent Greiner and numbered E1, E2, E3, and E4 are captioned bullet holes. If these were, in fact, bullet holes, it could be inferred that more than one gun was fired in the pantry during the assassination. If the captions had said possible, probable, or apparent bullet holes, one could assume that no precise examination had taken place at the time of the photographs. However, the captions would lead one to believe that a determination had been made by someone with the requisite knowledge and skills. The dilemma we are faced with is that the photograph captions are being used as evidence of the official FBI position in the absence of any other stated position. So now they beg, if more bullets were fired within the pantry than Sirhan's gun was capable of holding, we should certainly, not, the LAPD, the FBI and the LAPD, right, should certainly find out who is firing. It is therefore requested that the official position of the FBI regarding these bullet holes be relayed to this office. Now, I've not found a direct person-to-person letter response to this, but I believe strongly that one of the points of the Kranz report in 1977 was, to quote, rebut that. So from the FBI summary report, they did say in June, pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI released 803 pages of its file. On page 48, they had the report of the 4 reported bullet holes. Photographs were taken to substantiate the 1-page report that I just showed you, documenting that. However, no other reference is made to these reported 4 bullet holes in the other 802 pages of the FBI files. No ballistics evidence or other references to Greiner's 1-page report were found to substantiate the report of the photographer Greiner. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, Greiner. Additionally, District Attorney Van de Kamp thoroughly reviewed the FBI report and found no evidence to suggest that either 4 bullets had been fired or that 4 bullets had been found in the vicinity of the swinging doors. So what they didn't say is those weren't bullet holes. All right, that's what they didn't say. They said, well, this guy read the report and didn't think it supported the evidence. That's not a denial. That's a very clever way of hiding the fact that you are not denying that those were, in fact, bullet holes. So I believe, since freedom is granted to those who say, 2 + 2 = 4 here, that there was a conspiracy. I believe we can say that as fact. I think this is not a theory. I think we can say this if we are honest about the evidence. Now, and I totally respect those who don't want to go that far. I really do respect that. People have professional reputations to uphold. Our society has become such that you can't raise certain truths without some sort of repercussion. All right, but I'm not employed in any way, where my job is in jeopardy. My employers think it's cool that I'm pursuing this. I'm very lucky in that regard. So I feel like because I can speak out, I should. And I just want to say strongly, I believe we have proof of a real conspiracy that the LAPD felt the need to cover up, and the FBI felt the need to cover up too in its own kind of slick way. I also submit that if we're afraid to say this, then much more than Kennedy was killed on June 5th, 1968. When we have to live in fear of repercussion for saying 2 + 2 = 4, this is not a very good country. What we think we know but don't about the bullets. All right, here's my concern. I don't think we can make any conclusions based on the findings of the Wenke panel in 1975 unless we first prove that the bullets they examined were in fact the ones recovered from the victims in the pantry. And I have reason to believe that's not true. We've assumed they're the same because there was a bullet comparison done on June 6th, ostensibly, right? Picture of the two bullets. And that same picture was recreated by the panel in 1975. All right, and the one on the left was identified as a Kennedy bullet, and the one on the right was identified as the bullet from the victim Goldstein. However, let's think about this. The bullets were retrieved at the hospital. A photomicrograph was taken. Can we tell from the photo if those were the bullets retrieved? You know what? We can't, because the bullets were identified on the base of the bullet, and the base is not shown in the photomicrograph. So we really don't know if these two bullets are, if these bullets were the ones that were in the photograph. So we're going to leave that question mark for now. Now we have to say, are these bullets the same? The photomicrograph and the bullets in the panel. I believe we can say those are the same because the panel was able to recreate, a photograph that pretty much had all the same markings. So I'm going to say, yes, those are definitely the same bullets. All right, now here's where the real problem comes in. If we look at the markings on the base of the bullets examined in 1975 and the bullets as retrieved from the hospital, they don't match. They cannot be the same bullets. And that means the bullets in the photograph could not be the same ones. Now I'm going to show you the documentation that supports this. The marking on the Kennedy bullet was recorded by Thomas Noguchi. He scribbled, he scratched TN31 into the base of the bullet. All right, but the Kennedy bullet examined in the panel said DWTN. Obviously, these aren't the same. All right, here is what the panel's inventory list said. All right, it said and that says item 47. Unfortunately, I punched a hole through there so you can't see. But it says 47, it says number 2. If you read the stuff above, it was in the envelope marked 685731, Robert Kennedy bullet, signed Thomas Noguchi, initialed DW. This bullet on the base is marked DW and TN. All right, however, Thomas Noguchi wrote in the autopsy report specifically that he labeled the bullet with his initials, TN, and the number 31 because he always used the last 2 digits of the autopsy report whenever he had to mark evidence. All right, and he told the grand jury the same thing. He said, well, I placed my identifying mark, TN, my initials, and the last number of a medical examiner coroner's case number, so I placed 31, and at that time he's looking at it. He says, and it is clearly visible on the base of this bullet. All right, is there any way it could have said DWTN 31? Let's think about that. A 22 caliber bullet is a little less than 1/4 of an inch wide, so we're talking about a pretty small space. I would submit it's going to be pretty hard to get more than about 4, maybe 5 characters on a bullet. All right, obviously TN31, DWTN, doesn't look possible. Is it possible they could have done something like this? Well, that would have meant that Thomas Noguchi would have had to leave room when he was marking his bullet for somebody later to come back and initial it. I just don't think that's what happened. In the same way, that was the Kennedy bullet. Now let's look at the other half of that photograph. That was Exhibit 52, the Goldstein bullet. All right, when the Goldstein bullet was recovered during the autopsy, they said the witness removed the bullet and marked it with an X, with the base being the portion marked. So somebody marked an X on the base of the Goldstein bullet. All right, but in the panel, in their inventory list, they said that that bullet was marked 6 on the base. All right, 6 and X just aren't the same. All right, so I submit that there was a 2-phased lie. All right, because the first lie.
Can you go back to that last slide?
Sure, sure. Absolutely. So again, this is an inventory list that the 1975 panel had. All right, and these were, somebody went and documented all these items and listed them out one at a time, everything about the bullet and what was on it. Okay. All right, so we already know, we already know that the photomicrograph was a lie in the sense, Jolene showed that to us very clearly last night. He showed that they were told it was the Kennedy bullet matched to a chest bullet in order to prove Sirhan was guilty, but the panel found out it was the Kennedy bullet matched to the Goldstein bullet. Of course, now I submit that it's some bullet we don't know matched to some bullet we don't know because none of those markings match any of the bullets that were actually retrieved as documented in the autopsy report. All right, so I submit that the best way to hide a lie is to conceal it within another. And why does this work? Because when people find the first lie, they stop looking for the second, satisfied that they've uncovered the suspected deception. So I think that's what happened. The panel said, we don't trust this thing, and wow, we found they were lying. So they stopped there. They didn't look at the base of the bullets and match that back to the original record. All right, and that causes, serious concerns now because, how do we know what we can conclude if that's the case? And the LAPD admitted, basically, they knew there were problems with the photomicrograph. They took it knowing it showed some sort of deception. And they hinted at that because they wrote about it in a confidential addendum to the Lowenstein inquiry. Allard Lowenstein, a congressman, had a very serious interest in this case and was, writing the LAPD or requesting information from them. And they wrote him back point by point, but this was a confidential addendum he didn't see, but it's in the LAPD records. All right, I'll read you part of it. It says, this information has not been revealed prior to this report and may conflict with previous statements made by the chief of police and other officials. So they're already admitting, whoop, we got a little problem here. Serious consideration should be given to the release of this information. In other words, don't put this out there. There exists a photograph of the Kennedy bullet and a test bullet taken through a comparison microscope showing one land comparison. The photograph is an overall photo not shot for striation detail. The existence of this photograph is believed to be unknown by anyone outside of this department. Of course, it wasn't, because a couple people knew. But it should be rebuttal evidence were this case ever to be retried. And that's a very interesting statement if you think about it. If they were certain and they could prove that Sirhan had done it and done it alone, why would they even think it would be retried? So they knew there were problems, that likely this would give rise to some reinvestigation. And they said the release of the information at this time would be susceptible to criticism because lay people would, in all probability, have difficulty deciphering the photograph. Now, they were thinking lay people would look at it. They didn't know a panel of ballistics experts would look at it. The issue as to its not being revealed at an earlier time may further make its authenticity suspect, particularly to the avid exact assassination buff. They actually paid us a compliment, okay? They knew we would figure out that something was wrong here. All right, so there was a lie within a lie. The visible lie is that one of the bullets wasn't a test bullet but a victim bullet. But the invisible lie was that neither bullet was a victim bullet. And that just, again, that has huge implications for the case. If we don't find out, if these bullets were the same, we can't conclude necessarily that one gun fired the Kennedy and the Goldstein bullet, because now that throws that whole identification into question. It doesn't mean it didn't happen or that that isn't the case, but we can't prove it anymore just on the basis of the findings of the panel in 1975. If we don't know if any bullets matched any of the others, then we really also don't know how many guns were fired in the pantry, right? Because maybe there were 2 or 3 or 4. We know there couldn't have been 1, all right? But there's nothing precluding 3 guns from being used because maybe Goldstein and Kennedy were, shot by different guns. We can't rely on the 1975 conclusions if the bullets aren't the same. All right, this also means the cannelure issue is not necessarily solved because we have no way to prove. They took photos of the bullets, both Harper and Bradford later, but they took them from the side of the bullet, rolled over and photographed. Again, the photographs of that do not show the base of the bullet. So we don't know if the bullet that Harper looked at that he thought had 2 cannelures are the same bullets that Lowell Bradford photographed in color that show clearly only 1 cannelure. If they are the same bullet, then then we have an answer. But if they're not the same bullet, then all bets are off. And so I feel like this case is a lot of times 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I feel like we've got a little problem here. We're going to have to fix this. We're going to have to find out, do the bullets, are those really, is there an explanation? Is there some way that, Dwayne Wolfer somehow managed to rewrite the bullet identifications? I just don't know. And here's our biggest problem. Right now, according to Lowell Bradford, there's grease on the bullets that is deteriorating the markings on them. So we may not even have a way to go back and look to see which bullets are in the archive. All right, Larry Teeter, who was Sirhan's attorney until he died, wrote up his trip to the archives with Lynn Mangan, Adele Sirhan, and Lowell Bradford. And Teeter wrote the archives, quoting Bradford as saying the grease was not on the bullets when he saw them in 1975. And Bradford also said, there goes your evidence down the drain. All right, so this is pretty serious. And if anybody's a lawyer here, it'd really be great if we could get somebody to the archives quickly, get the bullets cleaned, try and find out what the markings are, see what's going on with the evidence, because once that's gone, there's no way to prove anything. So this is kind of critical. All righty. Harper had actually said at one point that the bullets were switched. He told this to Lynn Mangan. If Harper is correct, there are only 3 possible explanations. Wolfer, through incompetence or deceit, switched the bullets. Someone within the LAPD switched the bullets. Or someone with the access and skills of literally a CIA operative switched the bullets. And I mention that because in the chain of possession document along the way, the thing people keep referring to is usually not the bullet, but the envelope. Well, the CIA had a team that was literally called the Flaps and Seals team, that for years, what they do is sneak into the post office, steam open envelopes, examine the contents, put them back in, reseal it in such a way that people didn't know it had even been opened. This came out in the Church Committee. There's a whole volume of the Church Committee report on the CIA's mail opening program. So they had that kind of technology. They could literally break into a place, open an envelope, close it up, get out, and you would never know they were there. And again, I don't know that that's what happened. I have no clue if that's what happened. I'm just saying certainly that technology is possible. It is possible to get in, get into an envelope and get out without anybody knowing. All right, and of course, it's pretty much widely known the CIA had deep ties into the police departments all over this country. I have to say this because I've had my own personal run-ins with Lynn Mangan. I think somebody in this room calls her the Dragon Lady, if I'm not mistaken. And she can be very emotional, shall we say. But this part is what she showed me. She showed me these documents, and I'm like, it took me maybe a year for this to actually register. I'm like, oh my God, if those markings are really, not the same, there's a serious problem with a lot of our conclusions in this case. So I really want to give her credit for this, because this was her findings, her research. I was able to, find the other documents again, but, it was her work, and I really want to give her credit for that. And again, Lynn was the source. She was a good friend of Bill Harper. She used to go spend time at his house in Pasadena. He told her, she told me, they switched the gun, they switched the bullets. I don't know if that's true, but something's really funky with the bullets, and we've got to find out quick. All right. What we think we know, but don't, about the gunman. All right. Oftentimes it's said that only Schulman saw the guard pull his gun, and there were other witnesses to that. I just want to make sure we get that. Richard Lubick, who was a television producer and a friend of Kennedy's, said, after the shots, I saw to my left a guard holding a revolver. Lisa Urso, who was in the film we saw last night, and probably is speaking on the section we haven't seen yet, said the security guard had a gun, and I think he went like this, or put it in a holster or something. She told that to Phil Melanson when he interviewed her in later years. And I went to there's a place called the Museum of Television, and it's here in Beverly Hills, and there's another one in New York City. And one Saturday or Sunday, I went to the museum, and I just sat and I tried to find all the raw footage on the Kennedy assassination that they had. And I saw this kind of remarkable statement very quickly after the shots had been fired and people were still leaving the pantry. And Larry Shear was there saying, we had reports from 2 of the eyewitnesses that there were 2 assailants involved. All right, so there's a lot more than just Schulman to suggest, that second gun and specifically from the guard. All right, Judge referred to this here. I personally believe that Sirhan was firing blanks because of some of the statements that I've read on the record. All right, for example, Rayford Johnson, I think he's the most credible witness in this regard because as an Olympic decathlon champion, he'd seen a lot of starter pistols in his life. All right, he knew what it looked like. He knew when you fire a normal gun, there's not much to see. All right, the bullet comes out. There's not a lot of smoke. There's no visible flame, things like that. When you fire a cap gun or a blank, you're basically firing a wad of paper that flash ignites and burns and leaves a visible sign. It sparks, and especially if it's in a slightly darkened place, you're going to see it more. If it's in broad daylight, you're going to see it less. I've been on movie sets, where people have fired guns. You can see a little bit of stuff coming out of the gun. You don't want to be in the way of those either. Even a blank can kill you if you're too close. So anyway, Rayford said, I saw the second shot, I saw smoke, and I saw something from like the residue from a bullet or cap. It looked like a cap gun throwing off residue. He said he saw smoke and pieces of paper in the air. All right, now, what some people know, some people don't, is during the pantry fight, there was a moment where the gun was out of Sirhan's hand, and somehow it got back into Sirhan's hand. My big question is, was it the same gun? All right, did a cap gun get out of his hand and a real gun get put in its place? I don't know. I don't know if we can know, but it's certainly worth trying to find out, because if he was firing blanks, Sirhan's not guilty of killing anybody or wounding anybody. All right, that would be really exculpatory evidence. And again, if I were Sirhan's lawyer, I'd really want to find a way to research that. Carl Euchre, who again, one of the most credible witnesses we have in the pantry, said, I saw some paper flying. It looked like paper, white pieces of things. Again, that's what you see when you fire, a blank. You see just kind of a little shower of a little, tiny dust of paper. Richard Lubick, who was there, said it sounded like shots from a starter pistol at a track meet. Robin Kasdan said it sounded like cap gun shots to me. Norbert Schley, who I believe was a veteran of World War II. I didn't have time to look that up, and I've got about 4 hours sleep for the last 2 weeks trying to put this together, but I'm pretty sure he had a military background, and he said it didn't sound like gunshots to me. And I've heard a lot of gunshots. It sounded like a cap pistol or somebody cracking a balloon. And since Von Prague is here, Phil, I just want to ask really quickly, did you ever test like blanks for any of the other sounds, not the shot sounds? But if you have done any sound tests on blanks or cap guns?
No, my work was focused on the shot sounds that
Right.
I identified.
Right. I would love to know if there is a way to test for what a cap gun or a starter pistol might sound like, to see if that might explain other sounds in there. I mean, I don't know, further investigation is certainly needed in that area.
Let me add to that. When Phil got done, listened to him last night,
Mm-hmm.
8 of those shots had the same resonance.
Right, and 5 had a
the same
different.
resonance.
Right. And like I said, these wouldn't register as shots. If you were firing a cap gun, it would mean 3 guns.
But it would have a different resonance.
Right, right, absolutely. That's why I say I don't think it explains any of the 13 that were in your presentation. I think these would explain maybe some of the in-between sounds. And again, I actually had about 6 slides of people saying it sounded like a cap gun or they saw flashes, and I took it out because it gets redundant after a while. All right, but there were a lot of people who saw a visible flash come out of the gun and who really thought it was a cap gun. All right, why would Sirhan be firing blanks? If there's a conspiracy, why in the world would Sirhan be firing blanks? Well, first of all, trained assassins are pretty easy to find for those who pull these things off, all right? They have whole, training camps for these. There's an island in the, near Cuba where they trained assassins to send to Castro. I mean, a lot of people are trained for that. Sirhan was not a trained gunman. And what if, under hypnosis and not fully, cognizant of what he was doing, what if he killed the real assassin before the job was done? Because obviously Sirhan had to fire first to pull attention. Once people saw him, all eyes would go to him and they would miss anything else happening in the room. If somebody's pointing a gun at you, you don't look around to see if there's another gun. You look at that gun, and you don't want to take your eyes off of it because you don't want to get hit by it, right? So there's no better way to focus all the energy of the room in one spot than to have Sirhan firing first. Like I said, if he had a stray shot and he hit the wrong guy, your whole plot is sunk, if there is a plot. All right, so I think, there'd be good reason for him to be firing blanks. All right, now here's one of the most interesting documents I ever found from the CIA's mind control programs. It started as Project Artichoke, and then it later became Project MK Ultra, but this is pre-MK Ultra. Artichoke, by the way, was Alan Dulles' favorite vegetable, and that's why, it's kind of sad when you think of the vegetables they made out of people's minds. It's kind of not a joke. But this particular document says, as a trigger mechanism for a bigger project, it was proposed that an individual be induced under Artichoke to perform an act of attempted assassination against a prominent American official. So think of that again, an act of attempted assassination. After the act of attempted assassination was performed, it was assumed that the subject would be taken into custody by the government and thereby disposed of. So if you set up a plot like this, you get somebody to be your patsy, they get arrested, they get put to death, problem solved, for the people who were running these kinds of programs. Now, again, if Sirhan's firing blanks, right, and Thane Eugene Caesar is firing a gun, we're still 8 bullets short, right? Or at least 5 bullets short, all right? Because there are at least 12 or 13 shots. I believe Von Prague's evidence that there are really 13 shots. I think that's very clear. So obviously blanks plus 1 gun doesn't make enough shots. So there had to be a third gunman. So then the question is, who was it? Was any other gun seen? And actually, there were people who thought there was another gunman in the pantry. All right, Dennis Weaver had gone with his friends Patty Nelson and Joseph Klein to the Ambassador Hotel. After the shooting, all right, a man ran out of the embassy room towards the lobby. He had a rolled up poster, and Patty Nelson yelled, "He's got a gun." She told the FBI she really thought she saw a gun inside of the rolled up placard or poster. All right, Joseph Klein, who was with her, originally said to the LAPD that he didn't think there was a gun, but as he was recounting the story to them, he goes, I remember saying, my God, he had a gun and we let him get by. So his impression at the time was that this was a gunman running out. All right, William Singer, who also saw this, said, man came running and pushed his way out of the ballroom. He had a rolled up piece of cardboard with a placard. I think I saw something black inside. Just as he got past me, I heard screaming and people saying, stop that man. This man was Michael Wayne. All right, he was apprehended by another Ace security guard. Thane Eugene Caesar worked for Ace Security. This other guy, August Mallard, apprehended Michael Wayne as he was running away and literally handcuffed him and took him to the police. And Steve Fontanini, an LA Times photographer, took a photo of Wayne in handcuffs. I'd love to find that photo. I see references to the photo in the LAPD records because they showed that photo to other people to try and get them to ID Wayne. All right, but I haven't seen the photo myself, but that's in their report. All right, now, most of you know about Sandy Serrano and the way Hank Hernandez treated her and how he just berated her. Oh, that's not what you saw. And, Ethel Kennedy will write you a letter thanking you if you pretend you didn't see this girl in the polka dot dress. Well, now with Michael Wayne, Hernandez couldn't have been nicer. He says, oh, you know what? You said you were arrested. You know what? You were a juvenile. You don't have to say you're arrested. This was literally a lie detection question. Have you ever been arrested before? And Wayne was going to answer it honestly, yes. And Hernandez stops him and says, no, you can say no. I'll let that go. Yeah. And I found something really interesting. I had always read the documents of Wayne's testimony under his lie detector session, but when I got the audio, there was a key thing that didn't match. Wayne's explanation, as reported by the LAPD and all the authors on the case, was that he was running from the pantry to get to a phone to call people and alert them. But when he was asked on the lie detector, it appears he might have told the truth, because the audio version, he says no, that's not why he was running from the pantry. But on paper, they wrote down yes. So I guess that's one way you can pass a lie detector test. You tell the truth and you count on them to do the cover-up for you. That way there's no spike on the record. All right. Furthermore, Wayne was suspicious for other reasons. There was somebody who thought they'd been talking to Sirhan in the booth, but the more they showed him photos, they realized the guy had been talking to Michael Wayne. And Wayne had made some comment indicating that Kennedy was going to bite it before the end of the night. I don't remember the exact words. All right. But this question really caught the attention of one of the sergeants in the LA police force. There are a lot of good guys and bad guys, if you will, on the LA police force. I think Hernandez's behavior was abominable. But I think Gutierrez's behavior was very responsible. He thought this should be followed up on. And they started looking into Michael Wayne, and they found out, first of all, he'd gotten a ride to the hotel with Khyber Khan. Now, that's like a whole hour conversation in itself. Very interesting figure that the people at the Los Angeles headquarters of the Robert Kennedy campaign staff, they thought that man was really suspicious. They didn't know what he was doing, but they had really bad feelings about him. All right, I've written at great length about him. I'd refer you to my article on that case. All right, more interesting to me is that he had actually Michael Wayne had gone with a friend to the Las Vegas police rifle range. An ordinary person can't get in. You have to be a friend of the police to get into a police range. All right, it also means Wayne knew how to fire a gun. If he's going to a firing range, he knows a little bit about handling a gun. So who did he know, and was he a good shot? These are things that I think we should probably try and find out. All right, so several people saw Caesar with a gun. I think that's clear. Several people thought Sirhan was firing a cap gun. And again, I don't know if that's the case. It's possible they were all wrong. It's definitely possible. But I think it deserves further investigation, considering the number of people who really, would have been in a position to recognize that, who thought that's what they saw. Several people thought Michael Wayne was running from the pantry with a gun and a poster. We shouldn't assume there were two guns. We should consider that there might have been three. All right. For all I know, there might have been 4 or 5. I just don't know, but there's at least evidence that there were 3 different guns in the pantry. All right, so here's some stuff we still need to know. Why were Sirhan's tax returns hot? This is one of the most interesting documents I stumbled upon in my research. First of all, I don't even know if this is legal. I don't know if this is something a lawyer in the room can answer. But can the LAPD go snooping around in your IRS records? I don't think that's allowed. And this is in their daily summary report. And, Lieutenant, I can't even read his name here, but I could find out if anybody's, I can go back to my original document if anybody's looking. But the first item was, still have no info back, right? The income tax returns on Sirhan. Intelligence going back to IRS today. And then the third, I'm sorry, I wrote 3 on the top there, but it's item number 4. Late word from informant in IRS says that returns are hot, and either Chief Houghton or Matt Byrne will have to liberate the information. I don't know what that means. I could speculate. Does that mean he had some intelligence background that's showing up on his iris file? I don't know. But whatever it was, for some reason, ordinary people couldn't get into it. And I think that's really interesting. And I'd sure like to know what that means. Here's another one that I found that's pretty darn interesting. Did a hypnotized Sirhan disrupt a church service in Las Vegas? There was actually a report of that. There was a big article in the paper, and the police found it credible enough that they brought the pastor down and interviewed him. And it turned out that 3 weeks before the assassination, a mumbling and apparently tranquilized Sirhan disrupted a service at the First Methodist Church of Las Vegas. During the service, he made unintelligible sounds. How many of you saw that video last night, the hypnosis part? Do you remember him kind of mumbling at parts and they kept saying unintelligible? You know, it is one of the indications of somebody under hypnosis because they can't, you know, they're just not processing things the same way. And so they didn't know what he was trying to do. He complained to some members, so he spoke some words and he made some mumbling that no one could figure out. The reverend said that people often wander into the church. I mean, it is, after all, Las Vegas. And if the church thinks they're dangerous, they will immediately escort them out. But they said Sirhan was very tranquil, as if he might have been under the influence of a depressant, so they allowed him to remain. All right, at a coffee hour after the service, the reverend said, Sirhan came up to me and introduced himself. He mumbled and tried to say something, but I couldn't understand him. He says, the next time I saw him was on television during the coverage of the Kennedy assassination. He just didn't seem like the type of person who could commit such a foul act. And again, if Sirhan was hypnoprogrammed, if there was mind control involved, it follows, it does make sense that somebody would want to do a public demonstration to prove he could handle himself in a public situation, you know, or just to see what he did. You know, I don't know how many of you saw the film The Manchurian The Manchurian Candidate, the original. Show of hands, who saw that? Okay, most of you, great. So you probably remember the scene then where they do like a test firing. You know, they basically send this guy out on a test thing. They have him kill, his boss. They do a test run, you know, just to check out the mechanism. Well, the consultant to that film, all right, happened to be William Bryan, the guy many people believe was Sirhan's programmer. In fact, a guy who confessed to 2 prostitutes in Las Vegas that he was, you know, Sirhan's programmer. All right, so, you know, if Brian's hanging out in Las Vegas and there's this demonstration in Las Vegas, it's just interesting to me. Again, there's no conclusions I can draw, but there's plenty of questions I can draw from this. All right, so I'm getting into my sheer speculation part. Again, people ask me, what do you think? What do you believe? All right, so here's what I'm looking at currently. All right, there's something that actually can connect Sirhan, Brian, Grant Cooper, Thane Eugene Caesar, Michael Wayne, if you stretch it a bit, Manny Pena Hernandez, and even the Onassis payment angle. How many of you have seen or read the book Nemesis? Okay. The main source, you know, for a lot of this was intelligence people, and specifically by name, Robert Mayhew. Robert Mayhew was the CIA's guy on the Castro assassination plots. All right, Robert Mayhew was also tasked with bringing down Onassis. That was one of his goals, because in the early, 40s? I think it was the 40s. Onassis signed something called the JITA agreements, which gave him sole shipping rights to all the Saudi oil. Can you imagine how powerful that would make him? If you control the shipping of the oil, you control the oil supply in the planet. The CIA was terrified about this, as were many other people on the planet that didn't want one man to have all that power. So it was Mayhew's job to go sabotage that one way or another. All right, so, you know, Mayhew and Onassis had been at it kind of personally, you know, on that level. So I find it very interesting now that he's, you know, Mayhew is a source for a book that's saying Onassis is the guy who paid for the hit on Kennedy. All right, and that may still be true. I mean, again, I can't discount it. I did read the book. It's possible that Onassis's money paid for the hit on Kennedy. But as I read the book carefully, and by the way, it's I think, a very irresponsible book. I found a lot of statements. I'd check out the footnote, and it didn't check out. You know, just a blatant example was, oh, here's the bed that Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe slept in. And he leaves that as a statement of fact, and he puts a footnote there. I'm like, oh, how could he prove that? You know, he knew the exact bed. You know, I go look up at the footnote. It says, this was a bed where Marilyn Monroe was known to have slept in, you know, sometimes with paramours. Well, that's not proof that Kennedy slept there with her. And much of his book, unfortunately, is like that. So I take everything in that book with a grain of salt that can't be proven through 2 or 3 independent sources. But there does seem to be some evidence that Onassis might have, some of his money might have gone to the Kennedy hit. And if it did, I think I know who took it. All right, so this is kind of the web that I am looking at. I have a New York Times article. I'm going to start in the upper right, where it says the CIA considered spying on Robert Kennedy as important as spying on the Soviet Union. All right, now there's only 2 reasons that could be, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is the CIA was helping their sponsors, because the CIA really answers to the business crowd. That's who funded them, that's who got them started, that's who they serve. People in business were making a lot of money on the Vietnam War. Somebody who's going to stop it is going to cut a lot of people out of the money spigot. All right, so that's one reason. The other reason is, as David Talbot wrote in his book Brothers, Robert Kennedy strongly, suspected the CIA of involvement in his brother's death. And as we talked about yesterday, there was evidence that Bobby Kennedy was planning to reopen an investigation if he got to be president. So I would submit that those are 2 good reasons for the CIA to be really nervous about Robert Kennedy. I just found the fact that it was reported in the New York Times as based on documents from the CIA pretty stunning. All right, there were a lot of people in the CIA that hated the Kennedys. And in fact, Robert Mayhew writes about why the CIA hated the Kennedys so much in his own book. Sometimes these guys say things you wonder, do they even know what they're saying?
There was a woman who said that Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were agents of Peking. I think it's Solo, like Kennedy in the New York.
Yeah.
They were painting him as a red.
Yeah. So anyway, with Robert Kennedy, the CIA and Mayhew and Hughes all tie together. All right. Robert Mayhew was literally running Howard Hughes' Las Vegas operations at the time of the assassination. He'd been running it for years. He was brought in the 50s, became very powerful. He ingratiated himself with the entire power structure in Las Vegas. He knew cops, he knew congressmen, he knew the governor. Mayhew was everywhere in Nevada, but especially in Las Vegas. All right, and he did run the Hughes organization. Now, a lot of people don't know, but Thane Eugene Caesar was employed by the Hughes organization. He was employed in the Culver City operation, but he was a Hughes employee. There's a book out called The Assassination Chain, written by Sybil Leek and I forget the other, Bert Sugar. And it's recommended, it was given a preface or a foreword, I never knew the difference, someday I'll have to ask you, between it was given a foreword by Jack Anderson, the famous columnist, who wrote a lot of exposés. He recommended this book. So obviously he knew Sybil Leek personally. He said, she was a credible person. She said that she found out in Las Vegas one time that Thane Eugene Caesar was also a bodyguard to Hughes. And again, you can't be a bodyguard unless you know how to fire and shoot to kill. That's part of what a bodyguard does. And of course, we know he was in position to shoot RFK. A lot of people also don't know that he was the one assigned to guard the pantry. All right, so if for some reason he wasn't the shooter, how did he let a shooter get in? It was his job to prevent that. It was his job to keep people that didn't have the proper credentials out. And yet Sirhan was in there. How did that happen? All right. Mayhew had close connections with the LAPD. All right. In fact, they actually did a little porno flick together. They were trying to bring down Sukarno. The CIA made bringing down Sukarno in Indonesia a top priority because there was oil and rubber and resources in Indonesia that a lot of business people in America were trying to get their hands on, and they wanted a change of government, somebody they could pay off. Sukarno wasn't going to take our money and capitulate in that fashion. He's one of these people who actually thought he was the leader of his own country. So CIA wanted to bring him down. They made it a top priority, and there's a lot of documentation on that. Mayhew was involved in that to the extent that he and the LAPD and Bing Crosby, of all people, got together, hired a Sukarno lookalike, hired a blonde lookalike, made her up as a Soviet agent who ostensibly was really, sleeping with Sukarno. And they shot this little photo. They tried to make it look like it was a room in the Kremlin, and they shot this, using LAPD resources and some film resources. So, Mayhew had deep ties. He knew Sheriff Pitchess. It was like a close friend of his. They went back to their FBI days. He had big, deep ties to the LAPD and the entire system here. So, and then of course we know, those of us who've been reading about the case, the problem with Grant Cooper. I think the strong reason he couldn't defend Sirhan the way Sirhan needed to be defended is he was himself compromised. Cooper was literally facing disbarment at the time that he was representing Sirhan. So how independent could he really be? Larry Teeter claimed he had an FBI document that referred to Cooper's dilemma. Unfortunately, Larry died before I could get a copy of that document, and now his files are being held by the State Bar Association. And I hear the files are in disarray. There was also a break-in before the files were taken. That's why the files were moved to the State Bar, so they didn't all disappear. I don't know if that document still exists, but I'd sure like to find it if it's out there. Cooper was compromised because in the Friar Club scandal, he was representing an associate of Johnny Roselli, who was Robert Mayhew's hand-picked guy to run the Castro assassination plots. Johnny Roselli stole a grand jury transcript and put it on the desk, and Cooper had it. The judge saw that Cooper had this, and it's illegal for the judge to have access to that. And so, like I said, they basically had Cooper, in a noose that they could tighten if Sirhan got off. So I don't think Cooper, I don't know if he was dishonest. I don't know. I truly don't know. I just think there's a lot of room for question there. All right, so again, this is all speculation, but there does seem to be things happening in Las Vegas, the Michael Wayne connection to the LA, the Las Vegas police force. Did he know Mayhew somehow? I mean, I just don't know. The Sirhan possible test run in Las Vegas. Again, this is my incredibly speculative part of the presentation. But for those of you, with the energy and the resources who want to pursue further investigations, this is a line I'd certainly interested in pursuing. So what we still need to know. Were the bullets switched, and were they switched accidentally or deliberately? Why did Hernandez coach Wayne to lie? And who changed Wayne's no on the tape to a yes on paper, Ray's motive for running from the pantry? Was Sirhan's bizarre appearance in Las Vegas a demonstration for someone else? A test run of a hypnotized subject in a public, crowded situation? And, I put this out there just to say there is still new information on this case. It's not all out there in the books yet. There are a lot of books on this case, but there's still more in the files that no one's ever written about. So I encourage all of us to keep researching. The truth will set us free. 2 + 2 = 4. I believe Robert Kennedy was killed by conspiracy, and I believe the outlines of that plot are slowly becoming visible. Thank you very much. Okay, great.
Do you want to just take the questions?
Yeah, questions, yes.
Yeah, you know that Johnny Come Lately researcher Mel Azen? He's going around.
Oh, yes.
Well,
yes.
anyway,
I'm just trying to.
I was looking at some of his work on the internet the other day, and he's coming up with explanations for all this stuff. And one of them that stood out in one of his books, it shows a photo of Michael Wayne in the background, and it says, in the background is Michael Wayne, a Kennedy supporter.
Yeah.
Is that true?
It's not true that Wayne was a Kennedy supporter. It's true that Wayne is in a photograph. Wayne is seen clearly on video as Kennedy comes through the pantry to go to the stage to speak. He stops and he signs a poster for Michael Wayne. It's right there on video. Anybody can see that.
Does any of Kennedy's supporters know Michael Wayne?
No. He was not at headquarters. He was not volunteering. He was a collector, of memorabilia. He had a lot of things. Now, but it's interesting that you mentioned that because there's a story I really want to tell, and it's short. And it's about the John Kennedy assassination and another collector. All right, Richard Helms was a collector. He collected things like Adolf Hitler's stationery and wrote letters to his kids on it. All right, he's kind of an odd guy. 3 days before Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Allen Dulles walks in with a rifle to the president. Now, can you imagine how many people are allowed to bring a gun into the White House? Not many, but the head of the CIA can hardly deny. All right, he brought in this rifle to try to prove to Kennedy that the weapons cache that had recently been discovered in Venezuela was really from Cuba. Because if that were true, if Castro could be proven to be exporting his revolution, Kennedy had promised to invade Cuba. So Helms walks in with his gun. What kind of a statement do you think he's making? They were not friends. They were not close. All right, and he tries to convince Kennedy that this gun is really a Cuban weapon. Oddly now, of course, the markings on the gun had been erased by acid, but Helms told him, we have this secret CIA process where we can scatter a little dust on it, and magically, for a few seconds, the markings will appear and then go away again. I love this story. Meanwhile, there's a guy down in Venezuela, another CIA guy who's writing in his book years later, we planted those weapons in Venezuela. We were trying to foment, action against Castro. That's what we do, all right? But anyway, Kennedy doesn't know that, but Kennedy doesn't fall for it. He just doesn't buy it. On the way out, Helms stops and he asks for a signed photograph of the president. Kennedy'd been in office 3 years already, and they weren't friends. Why did he want a signed photograph of the president? Because if he didn't get one then, he might not have had a chance to get one. I just put that out there. When I read that, my jaw dropped open, and you know where I read it? In Helms's own autobiography. It's almost like he wants you to know. Yeah, so anyway, in terms of collecting, I suspect Michael Wayne might have known too that signature might be valuable. That's all I'm saying.
You mentioned before about the gun getting out of Sirhan's hand and back in. What do you base that on?
Several eyewitnesses who had the gun in their hand. There were like 3 or 4 people who touched the gun before it went back to Sirhan. One of them being Boris Yarrow, one of them being Gabor Kadar, I think is his last name. I have it in my files, but these are people who told the LAPD, oh my God, my fingerprints are on that gun because I held it. So, yeah, pretty interesting.
Speaking of guns, was a gun recovered from Wayne when he was handcuffed?
Good question. I don't see, I'm looking for that. I can't see, did they take the poster from him? Was there a gun? Wasn't there a gun? I was going to say, there's no record of either, so I truly don't know. I can't answer that. Go ahead.
Another mystery, Khalid Khan,
Khyber Khan.
Khyber Khan. But anyway, Mel Aiden again says he's a Kennedy supporter. Where came in the last few days of the campaign to help the Kennedys.
Well, now, again,
Is that true?
Kennedy supporter or not, he did show up at campaign headquarters. He also brought 40 volunteers that registered under Khyber Khan's physical address, his home address.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, that's how they caught an Iranian assassination team, because they found too many people all registered at the same address, and that was like a classic tip-off. So I find that, again, provocative. I don't know if he was a true supporter, if he was there to protect him or to kill him. I don't know.
But what
But he
about-
did give the ride to Michael Wayne to the,
But researchers, Bill Turner, some of the others, they must have contacted Kennedy supporters and says Khyber Khan was working there the last few days.
Oh, he was. I mean, there were plenty of people. But they
Was
say
there
he was
anything
suspicious.
suspicious?
Yeah. The people there didn't trust him. They felt he was shifty. They got a bad vibe from him. In fact, right after the assassination, 3 or 4 of them called the LAPD and said, we think this guy might have been involved. He's so suspicious to us. And they listed some of their reasons. Nothing, again, is provable, but yeah, the campaign did not trust him.
Okay.
Okay, so again, if Mel Leighton says that, what does that tell you about Mel Leighton?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, he hasn't done his homework, yes.
Have you done anything going back in Sirhan's life? Mae Russell said that when the family was in, I believe, Lebanon, the father's business failed.
Well, he wasn't in Lebanon, he was in Jordan.
Jordan,
Right,
okay.
right.
And
Yeah, his
that-
father's business
and
failed.
that he failed, that he converted right then from a Roman Catholic to a Greek Orthodox,
No, I
and that,
Yeah.
I'm just telling you this was
Yeah,
homemade
yeah.
stuff. And that money was provided through the Greek Orthodox Church for them to come to the United States.
I believe it was the World Council that provided them funds to come to the United States. And Sirhan was a Christian, by the way. In fact, if I may just interrupt you for a second, I say this because Alan Dershowitz just said on the anniversary, he said, Sirhan's act might have been the first act of Muslim terrorism. Sirhan was a Christian! Okay, go ahead.
She also said that when they came to the United States, the father went on to California to find work, but the mother stayed in Whittier, at Nixon's mother's house.
There is a connection. I don't know if she stayed at the mother's house, but I think it was Nixon money that helped bring them over, which is interesting, yeah.
And she just said that. And the other thing I found kind of interesting, kind of crossover stuff, is that because both Sirhan and Charlie Manson attended parties at the Tate House.
Now, I've never seen evidence for that, which isn't to say it didn't happen, but it wouldn't surprise me. What's interesting about that is I assume Bill Turner's going to talk about Jerry Owen. And are you going to talk about Jerry Owen in relation to the Tate LaBianca murders?
No.
Because he also went to the police after that murder and claimed he might have taken one of those guys to the Tate LaBianca house. So it's a very weird parallel.
Mary also said that the cover for the Manson operation that Peter Pritchard had put out, the sheriff had put out orders to stay away, like not bother them, not arrest them, not the sheriff's department. But
I've always thought the Manson case needed a lot more investigation than it's ever gotten in terms of what was really going on, but, yeah.
well, one of the women, because there's a shooting later at Ford by Squeaky, and and that's got a whole bunch of connections. But there's also another one of the women wrote to me and said that they thought that they were MK Ultra victims when I worked out in California.
Wouldn't surprise me. And it wouldn't surprise me if Bugliosi didn't uncover that. Any other questions? Yes?
On the lines of Sirhan's church affiliation, I've heard for years from my sister, who's in the Nazarene church, that Sirhan was a Nazarene. I wondered if you have any, I don't know why to fit that in, except I've heard so many times from my sister that I'm curious about why it would be in a Methodist church, because Nazarenes are usually quite.
I don't think he was in that church to go to church. Let's be clear about that. I don't think his appearance in that church had anything to do with his faith. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.